Well, shalom, dear friends, and welcome to this session of Hebrew School. Today we will be reading from Genesis chapter 13. It's kind of a short chapter, so this shouldn't be a real lengthy video. And one of the things that we started, I think, one or two videos ago is instead of taking every word and really every portion of a word and translating word by word, we're starting to do full sentences now. So what I'll be doing is reading from the English version that we'll be using today, the New King James Version. And also then we'll read the whole verse from the Hebrew Old Testament. And then I'll talk about some of the special word constructions, sentence constructions, and some of the theological things that you might find of interest. Before we launch into that, let me go ahead and share one thing with you that I have been using for quite a while and really enjoy, and I think you might too. The U version of the Bible is very popular. Lots of people use it, but probably not many Americans use the Hebrew versions that are available in U version. I really don't know that much about U version, but if you're interested in doing this, when you go to the App Store or whatever your source is for these apps, check it out and make sure that the version of U version that you will be using, that you'll be downloading and making use of, has the Hebrew Bible. The one that I use, and this is just what you see in the middle of the screen, is just a screenshot from my phone, from my iPhone. It has the Old Testament in Hebrew. It also has the New Testament in a number of different versions. I think the Delitzsch version is available, and also the modern Hebrew translation of it, kind of the standard modern Hebrew translation of the New Testament, is the one that I believe is on the screen now. Yes, it looks like it's the Tanakh Moderni, maybe. So yeah, this is the a modern Hebrew translation of the New Testament that I'm looking at. But it also has audio features. So this part of the screen, as you know, it can be either used or not used. I just have it prominent here on the screen so you can see that it exists. So what I usually do is I will just turn on my U version and play the audio version. And as it's playing, I can either read along and hear all the Hebrew words pronounced correctly by skilled Hebrew speakers, or not even look at the text, just listen to the spoken word, the word of God in the Hebrew language. And I really think that might be the best way to learn Hebrew, is just by listening to it being spoken and not even looking at the printed page. Initially, when I started doing this, I had trouble even keeping my place in the written word. But I've done this enough that now I have no problem with that, and I can follow along pretty easily. I recognize most of the words. And when I started just listening without looking at the text itself, it just seemed like babble. It just didn't make any sense at all. But I continued to do it for as long as I could tolerate it at a time. And I've gotten very familiar with the spoken words, and I pretty much always know, where I am in the scriptures, what stories being told, what verses are being read. There are some words that I don't recognize, but the context of spoken Hebrew usually helps me figure out what those words are. So I just want to highly recommend U version. I think it's free. And that will give you a Hebrew text of the Old and New Testaments. And it also has that audio feature that I think will really help you with your Hebrew language. Okay, having talked about that, let me take a look at a couple of maps here, because the story we're going to be reading today is in Genesis 13, and it's the story of Abraham and his nephew, Lot, who traveled with him when he left Ur of the Chaldeans, the Chassidim, and traveled to the promised land under God's instructions. Lot traveled with him, as well as some of the other family members, but Lot also came south with him. And I've got this map here just so we can take a kind of a preliminary cursory look at the route of travel. I think it was probably along the solid line as opposed to the dotted lines. But I think Abraham and his family just followed the Euphrates River up into north into Syria to a city called Haran. And they lived there for a while until Abraham's father, Terah, died. And then Abraham and Sarah and Lot left the extended family there in Haran, and they traveled south into the promised land. And these are some of the places that they may or may not have visited along the way. But we know that he came to Shechem and Bethel and Hebron, and Jerusalem is here on the map. Jerusalem will come later in chapter 14, down to Beersheba. I want you to just notice like the path, or the pattern of the travel here. So it starts down here, travels along the Euphrates River, and then south into the Holy Land. And in probably chapter 12, we had the story of Abraham and Sarah going into Egypt and spending some time there. Let's see, 12:10 to 14:24. So here we have the promised land, and here we have the route that they took into Egypt. I don't think the Old Testament tells us exactly where they went in Egypt, but the arrows show them going to On, or Heliopolis is the Greek term of that city. So, of course, here's the Nile Delta, and here's the Nile River, kind of flowing north and from Upper Egypt. This would be Lower Egypt, the Delta region. Here's Goshen and everything in connection with the Exodus. But I want you to notice the path here. So if you kind of combine these two maps, you got Abraham traveling a long way from ancient Babylon, Ur of the Chaldeans, to Haran, then south into the promised land, over into Egypt. They stayed there for a while. They got very rich in Egypt. And then they came back to the promised land. One of the other things I want to point out that will be kind of interest to us today is that when Abraham and Sarah returned from Egypt, and I assume Lot was with them, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. They were up in like this area, and this would be a mountainous region. Of course, this is the Jordan River Valley here. Dead Sea is the lowest place on the face of the earth, and then the Jordan River runs through this area and keeps the Jordan Valley pretty well watered. Even nowadays, water from the Sea of Galilee that runs south to the Dead Sea is utilized for irrigation and watering crops along here. It's really a very fruitful area, even though it's mainly kind of sandy desert and so forth. So Abraham and Lot are going to kind of come to a decision about where the two of them are going to live, because actually they have a nice problem. They're both so rich and wealthy, and they have so many flocks and herds that the land won't support them together. There's not enough pasture land. There's just not and there were some feuds breaking out between the two. So they decide to divide. And Lot is going to go down into the Jordan River Valley, this area, and he is going to kind of settle around Sodom and Gomorrah, which most scholars think is down at the southern end of the Dead Sea. So that's where he settles, and he chooses it because it is such a fruitful land. And of course, the minerals in the Dead Sea cause it to be a very wealthy kind of area. Abraham will give Lot first choice wherever he wants to go. If he goes one way, Abraham will go the other way. So Abraham stays up here in the hill country and settles down around Hebron at the Oaks of Mamre. So that's the geography we'll be looking at today. Let's go ahead and look at the text, and then we'll come back to my PowerPoint when we get towards the end of this chapter. Once again, we are using Accordance Bible software, the free version, with some of the resources that I have purchased. For the English text today, I'm using the New King James Version with the Strong's information that will pop up in our little information window down at the bottom of the screen. So we'll have some access to Hebrew words. We'll also have the Hebrew text that we will be using and reading from. It's just the standard BHS, the Biblica Hebraica Stuttgartensia, standard scholarly version of the Old Testament. And then we also have the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, Hebrew Old Testament. That was made in about the 2nd century, maybe a little earlier than that, BC or BCE, before Common Era, if you prefer that paradigm. So let's go ahead with our text. And this takes place after Abram and Sarah had returned from Egypt. So then Avram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him. So it sounds like Lot was with them when they were in Egypt, to the south. So here's the Hebrew: Vaya'al Avram mim Mitzrayim hu ve'ishato ve'kol asher lo ve'lot imo ha-negeva. So Ya'al means to go up. Avram is Abraham's name. The mim prefix here means where they came from. Mitzrayim is where they had gone. So mim Mitzrayim means out of or away from Mitzrayim. Who, that's he, Abraham. Ve'ishato, Isha is Abraham's wife, so that would be Sarah. Ve'kol asher lo, and all that was to him. That would be all of his possessions. It would be any servants in his household. It would be the shepherds who would be taking care of his flocks and stuff like that. Ve'lot, that's Lot in Hebrew. Imo, with him. Ha-negeva, the Negev means the south region. So when they came back to Israel, they settled down in the south territory, down in the tribal area, what would become the tribal area of Judah and so forth. So then verse 2, Avram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. Avram kaved me'od b'mikneh b'kesef uvazahav. So Abraham, kavad or kaved is the Hebrew word for, actually it's glory, but the idea of glory is weightiness. So Abraham was weighed down. Me'od means very much. So he was weighed down with the weightiness of his wealth. Ba is the prepositional prefix in, and mikneh is stuff that you acquire. So possessions, usually material possessions. I think sometimes it could be a reference to livestock, as the New King James Version here says. It's related to the name Cain, which means Eve named him that because she had acquired a man-child from the Lord. So verse 3, and he, Avram, went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. So when we looked at the map of Abraham coming south into the promised land, Bethel was the first city. It's up north of Jerusalem, kind of in the middle of the country. And it's the first place that the red line of Abraham's travels passed through. So he went to Bethel. He pitched his tent there for a while. We'll find that he built an altar there. So Bethel is the place where he returned after the Egypt trip. So let's do this in Hebrew. Vayelek la ma'asav min Negev ve'ad Beit El ad hamakom asher hayasham ahalo, sorry. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. These two words look very similar. So I'm pronouncing this one, ahalo. Ba tequila bein Bet El ubein ha'ai. First of all, masa, this comes from, the root word is nasa, which means to journey from one place to another. Negev, we've already said that Negev means south. So he came from the south. So from Egypt, they came to the southern part of the promised land, and then they traveled north from the Negev, Negev. Ad until Beit El. Beit El is the name of the city, the first place he settled down in the promised land, and now he's returned to it. Ad until Hamakom, the place, Asher, where, Chaya, it was, Sham, there, Ahalo. Now, I said I'd talk about these two words. In the Hebrew Bible, there are a variety of different conventions for how to express that. But sometimes a word is written in a way that the translators, the way that the Bible scholars believe is incorrect. So if you look at a Hebrew Bible, this is the word that you would see written, and it would be pronounced ahalo with a hey on the end. But the translators believe that according to the rules of grammar, it should have been written without the hey on the end, and it should have been a holem vav rather than just the holem by itself here. So this word is called the ketiv. Katav means to be written. So that's the word that's written in the text. But oftentimes, especially in scholarly versions of the Old Testament, you will see a word in brackets or parenthesis that is called the kere. Kara means to speak forth or to proclaim. So this is the ketiv and this is the kere. And you'll notice that these words are almost always going to be nearly identical, just the pronunciation is slightly different. So this is the way that the scholars think it should have been written and should be pronounced. This is the way it was actually written. But having great respect for the written word, they leave it, even though they think it's incorrect, they leave it the way that they have received it in writing. And just either put this in the margin or put it in brackets. Brackets usually indicate that it's not actually on the written page. So this is the ketiv, this is the kere, and we usually pronounce according to the kere, okay? But the hila means at the beginning. And then it's talking about Bethel, where he camped, pitched his tent, built his altar, and so forth. And that was Bain, between Beth El and Bain Ha'ai. Now in English, we would just say between Bethel and Ai. But the standard way of doing it in Hebrew is to use the word Bain twice. So it's between Bethel and between Ha'ai. So just be aware of that. And you get used to it because it happens all the time. Wanted to talk a little bit about this city called Ai. About half the time in the Bible, it is used with a definite article. So this is the definite article. It is the I. And I, actually, it kind of means an eye. That's one meaning of it. If you look up this word, the root word is ayin vav. I think it's ayin vav hey, as you see down in the information window. Let me see if I can get to the information window. Here is, whoops, I lost it. Okay, here is the three-letter root word. And this word means crooked or profane, or it's sometimes used of evil and prostitution and stuff like that. So some people say that this must have been an evil city because the root, the Hebrew root of the name of the city had something to do with evil and prostitution. So it may have been kind of the red light district. You'll remember in the story of Joshua that after Jericho was defeated, the next cities on the agenda were Bethel and Ai. So they traveled up north there after the great victory at Jericho. And Ai was just a little place, so they didn't even send the whole army. But they were defeated by the citizens of Ai, and that was because Achan had, taken some dedicated stuff from Jericho, and so the Lord wasn't with them in the battle, and so they lost the Battle of Ai, and had to deal with Achan first, and then they went back and they had the victory. So these are two important cities in Israel, and that's where Abraham, Sarah, and Lot traveled after Egypt. Verse 4, let me pull this up a little bit higher on the screen. Verse 4, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first, there in Bethel. And there Avram called on the name of the Lord. We use this convention, the Lord with all caps, instead of saying the sacred name of God over here, Yahweh is the way I'm convinced that it should be pronounced. There's some debate about it, but I don't think it's too serious a debate. But the convention in both Judaism and Christianity is not to pronounce the name of Yahweh. When the Hebrew Old Testament was translated into Greek, the word kuriou, which is Lord, was used. So that's where the idea of Lord comes from. The vowels for Yahweh here, we've talked about that before, are actually not the vowels for how you would pronounce Yahweh. They are the vowels for how you would pronounce Adonai, which is the Hebrew word for Lord. And this convention is something that the apostles and the evangelists and the Bible writers of the New Testament maintained. So although I don't think there's anything wrong with pronouncing God's name, I think he gave it to us so that we would know what it is and we could pronounce it. We could bless people with it. We could do good things with his name, but he warns us not to take it in vain. So I'm going to try to remember when we come across this sacred name in the Hebrew text to say Adonai instead of Yahweh, but I may slip up once in a while, so please forgive. Slicha li. El Makom HaMizbeach Asher Asa Sham Berishonah Vayikra Sham Avram Bashem Yahweh. So to the place of the altar, Mizbeach is an altar, which Abraham made, Sham there, Berishonah at the beginning. Tehillah, I believe in the last verse was, it's a synonym for at the beginning, or the first one that he made. Vayikra, he called. This root word, kara, is where we get the kere. We talked about the kativ and the kere, that which is written and that which is spoken. So this is the root of the kere. He called Sham there, Avram, Bashem, in the name of Adonai, or obviously Yahweh. Verse 5. Lot also, who went with Avram, had flocks and herds and tents. So Gam lalot haholech et Avram chaya zon uvakar va'ohalim. Okay, so also Lot, who was traveling with Avram, was to him was to Lot was haya zone. That's a word for sheep. I think you could probably also extend it to small animals like goats and stuff like that. So zone is kind of a general reference to small animals like sheep and goats, and bakar, I think, is larger animals like ox and, beef cattle or whatever else they have, larger animals. The ohalim, achal is a tent. So he had tents. This is plural ending. So Lot also has a lot of possessions. He has a lot of servants. He has a lot of shepherds to take care of his flocks and herds, and so forth. Verse 6, now the land was not able to support them that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. Velo nasa otam haaretz lashevet yachadav ki chaya rekusham rav velo yachalu lashevet yachadav. So we're talking about the land here, haaretz. It was not, it could not bear up. Nasa means to lift up or carry. So the land couldn't carry the wealth. It couldn't lift up the wealth, or it couldn't support the possessions of Abraham and Lot together. Otam, them. Lashebet, shebet means to dwell together. Yachadav, yachadav means to dwell together. If you go to Israel and visit Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls community down by the Dead Sea, you will learn there that one of the names of the Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, was the Yahad. And it comes from this word right here. And it means to dwell together in unity. Let's see, there's a Bible verse from the Old Testament that talks how good and pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. So Yahad here, it's the number one, but it it means to be in unity. So two people or more people dwelling as one. They're rekusham. Rekusham, possessions. We've already talked about it. It can, mikne can be livestock. Rekusham is a synonym, probably includes livestock, but also, all their goodies, all their material stuff, probably includes their silver and gold also. So they had Rekusham Rav, lots of it. They couldn't live together anymore. The land just wouldn't support them. And that's not the only reason that they couldn't live together anymore. As we learn in verse 7, there was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. And we're also told that the Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land, probably in that area around Hebron where they were living. So in Hebrew, V'yahi riv is a conflict or a strife. So V'yahi riv ben ro'eh, a ro'ah is a shepherd. So the ro'eh, plural, of the mikne Avram, uvein ro'eh mikne Lot, V'hakanaani, V'haperizi, az, then Yoshve ba'aretz. So there was a strife, riv, between the shepherds of Avram and Lot. And so the Perizim and the Canaanim, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, were in the land. Verse 8. Move up here to the top of the page. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Hebrew, Vayomer Avram El Lot, Al Na Tihi Mariva Beni Uvencha. Venecha. Uvein Roai Uvein Roecha. Ki Anashim Achim Anachnu. A couple of things here. Al means don't, and na means please. So this would be Abraham saying, please don't let there be tahi. It's the verb of being, chaya. Meriva. Meriva is the noun form of the verb reeve. If you look down at the information down below, information window down below, you'll see that the three-letter root is resh, yod, bet. That's the verbal form of reeve. If you want to make it a noun, you put a mem in front of it. So mariva is the noun for strife or disagreement. During the Exodus, there was a place called Meribah. Meribah and Massah. Massah means to test or tempt God in that case. And Merivah means to strive against or struggle or quarrel with God. And that's where the Israelites complained that they didn't have enough food and water, and they didn't like the way things were going. So they strove with God. The Roi, my shepherds, Roecha, your shepherds. Abram says we are because ki anashim, men, plural, achim, we are men who are brothers. Anachnu, we are. Actually, they weren't brothers in the literal biological sense of the word. Lot was Abraham's nephew. But when Abraham is talking to Lot about being brothers, it would mean that they have some spiritual connection. They believe in the same God. They're serving the same God. They are, trying to live in a brotherly fashion, even though they're not biological brothers. So, in the spiritual sense, even people you're not at all related to, except through Noah's family and Adam and Eve, you can still be a brothers and sisters with them. It's a spiritual relationship. Verse 9, is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. So Abraham makes the suggestion, and he gives Lot the privilege of choosing first. And whatever he chooses, Abraham will honor that and go the other way. Vayomer Avram El Lot Al Na Tiki. Oops, we did not advance our Hebrew version here. That's much better. Get verse 9 at the top of the page. Halo kol haaretz lifanecha. Hifred na elai im ha small va'enani va'yemina. I pronounced that wrong. Va'im hayamim ve'asmila. So halo, it's called a hey interrogative. It's not a direct object, but it's kind of a question mark in Hebrew. So he's saying, is not all the land before us? And here's where he makes the suggestion, hifred. This is a nephal imperative. So that's the form of a nephal imperative. Separate, na, please, may alive, from me. Im hasmol. So if you go to the left, Va'emina, I will go to the right. Yamim is right, and the aleph here is kind of an imperfect prefix. Yeah, Va'im hayamin, if you go to the right, ve'asmalia. Asmalia. Yeah, that's right. No, that's left. I'll go to the left. Okay, so verse 10. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw in the plain of the Yarden, the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. We talked about the Jordan River providing lots of irrigation water for the Jordan River Valley. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, it was like the garden of the Lord. That's a reference to the Garden of Eden. Like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. So in Egypt, one of the reasons that Egypt does well in times of drought, a lack of rainfall, is because of the Nile River serves as irrigation source for the Nile River Delta and the Nile River Valley. Well, same thing with the Jordan River, just on a smaller scale. So this is verse 10. Let me get it up here to the top of the screen. Okay, verse 10. Vayisa Lot et enav vayar et kol kikar hayarden ki kula mashke lifanei shachet Adonai et Sodom ve'et Amorah ka gan Adonai ka eretz Mitzrayim boacha zoar. Okay, there's a lot here. Yasa, that's nasa, and it means to lift up. In this case, Lot is lifting up his eyes. And that's a Hebraism. Most of us would just say he looked over towards the Jordan River Valley, but in Hebrew you say, Isa enav, he lifted up his eyes. Lot is the person who did it. He lifted up et enav. Enav is the direct object that he lifted up. So that's how you say it in Hebrew, Esa Lot et enav vayar. The three-letter root is ra'ah. It means to see. So he looked upon her, he saw et kol kikar. Kikar is the Hebrew word for a valley. So he's looking at the Jordan River Valley, but it's also the word for a talent, which is a measure of weight. Like Lot and Abraham both have a lot of silver and gold. So if they weighed them, it would be a certain number of kikarim or kikarot, talents of gold or silver. And it's a lot of weight. It's a lot of weight. A talent of gold would be worth a fortune. Not even a small fortune, a pretty large fortune. Ha-Yarden, the Yarden is the name of the river. Ha is the definite article. Yarden it comes from the three-letter root Yarad, which means to go down. And that's a perfect name for the Jordan River because it comes down from the top of Mount Hermon. It's usually snow on the top of Mount Hermon that melts and runs down the mountain into the Jordan River Valley. Comes through a small lake north of the Sea of Galilee called Lake Hula, H-U-L-A, I believe, and then enters into the Sea of Galilee, flows out south into the Sea of Galilee, down the Jordan River Valley and into the Dead Sea. Now, it can't flow out of the Dead Sea because the Dead Sea is the lowest point on the face of the earth. It's 1,200 feet below sea level. And because, like, in order to get down to the Gulf of Aqaba or the Red Sea, it would have to flow uphill, and water just doesn't do that. Now, the Bible tells us that in the future, the Red Sea and the Dead Sea are going to be connected, and the water will flow out of the Dead Sea, and there will be animal life, fish life in the Dead Sea, but not now. So the Jordan River is called the Yarden because it flows down toward the south. Ki, kula, means everywhere or very much. Mashke, shaka means to drink or to be watered. So mashke is the noun version of shaka. Lifane, shachet. Lifane means before, and in this case, it means before in time, previous to. Lifane can also mean like standing before a person. Pane is the face. So lifane would be towards the face of a person. So if you're looking at the screen, if you're looking at my face on the screen, then you're lifane, lifani, you're before me. Shachet means to destroy. So this story, the narrative, happens before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So this is a spoiler alert. It's not an alert, it's a spoiler. It's telling us that sometime in the near future, Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. One of the things that you should notice is Sodom sounds like the English Sodom, but the name of the other city is Amorah. Amorah doesn't sound like Gomorrah. There's no G on the beginning here. Now, one of the theories is that in Proto-Hebrew, that is before the Old Testament was written, before the New Testament was, was written, that in the Hebrew alphabet, there was the letter Ayin here, and then there was a similar letter, maybe even a version of the Ayin that was called the Gain, like with a G. So those two letters may have been very similar. It may have been one of these things like there was a Dagesh in one and there wasn't a Dagesh in the other one. But that may be where the idea of Gomorrah came from, because way back when the Gain as a letter was in use. Also, the word Gaza, I believe in the Old Testament it's pronounced Aza with an Ayin. So there may have been a G in the there is a letter Gimel, so it's not spelled with a Gimel, but it may have been spelled with a variation of the Ayin, which was pronounced with a G sound, so Amorah. Gan. Gan is the Hebrew word for garden, like Gan Eden is the Garden of Eden. So this is just called the Garden of Yahweh or the Garden of Adonai. Ka'eretz Mitzrayim. It's like the land of Mitzrayim. It's like the land of Egypt. Achal zone. Ba'a, Beit Vav Aleph, means to go. The ka ending here means as you go, by way of zone or toward. I'm sorry, it's Zoar, not zone, Zoar, which is the name of a city. And so it's pointing you towards the Nile River, because the land of Egypt is well watered by the Nile River, just like the Jordan River Valley is well watered by the Jordan River. All right, verse 11. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. So v'yivachar lo lot et kol kikar hayarden v'yasa lot mekedem v'yifradu ish me'al achiv. Okay, v'yivachar. Bahar means to choose. To choose. So Lot chose lo to himself, to him, Lot is the subject, et kol kichar hayarden, the Jordan River Valley. Vayisa, and he traveled, Lot traveled, mikedem. Now, we have talked before about this word mikedem. The prepositional prefix mem usually means away from. Like they came mim Mitzrayim, means out of or away from Mitzrayim. Kedem here means eastward. So you would think that away from eastward would be westward. But we know from where they were standing there at Bethel, which is where apparently this took place, that the Jordan River Valley is to the east. So here, Mikkedem means in the direction of the east, which is kind of confusing. So sometimes Mikkedem means eastward, sometimes it means westward. And the context just has to tell you. And I just explained how the context assures us that Mikkedem here means in an easterly direction. Vayifradu, they separated, Ishmael Achiv, each man from his brother. Let's see, verse 12. Avram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. And remember, when we looked at the map, Sodom was down towards the south. It may not have been in the south. I think on the map it says Sidim. I guess actually we could take a look at that, what it says on the map. Okay. So yeah, here's the valley of Sidim, and here is Zoar. Like as you travel towards Zoar and the valley of Sidim, maybe the reason that the scholars think that Sodom and Gomorrah were down here on the south part of the Dead Sea. Also, I guess they have found some evidence of the fire and brimstone that God rained. I don't know if the ground is darkened or kind of burned or something like that. But anyway, this is where the scholars think Sodom and Gomorrah were. So we'll go along with that. I don't have any reason to argue with that. I argue about enough stuff. Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan. Avram yashav ba'eretz Canaan, Lot yashav ba'arei hakikar, echal ad Sodom. Achal means to. If it's a noun, it's the word for a tent. If it's used as a verb, as it is here, then it means to pitch a tent. So Lot pitched his tent ad Sodom, which would be near or approaching or unto Sodom. Verse 13, but the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against Adonai. Verse 13, V'anashei Sodom ra'im v'chateim la Adonai me'od. So we are going to find out that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah that was so abominable to the Lord was the sin of homosexuality. Now, that is not a popular thing to say these days in our contemporary culture. And there are even some theological proposals, I guess, that have been made to argue that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was not homosexuality, but it was their inhospitality to their neighbors, especially those two angels who came from God and visited the city, and they weren't treated very well. But the reason they weren't treated very well is because all the city was perverted sexually, and the men of the city wanted to have sex with these male angels. They probably didn't know they were angels, but they wanted to have sex with other men. And it's called toeva, an abomination in the Bible. So let the Bible say what it wants to say. That was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what they were punished for. And here the text is telling us that that city was exceedingly wicked and sinful. And then the story of Sodom and Gomorrah that follows will, that'll be in chapter 18 or 19, I think. We'll explain that pretty straightforwardly. Verse 14, and the Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. Verse 14, Adonai Amar el Avram, Acharei hifred Lot me'imo, sa na einecha v'ra'eh min hamakom asher ata sham tzifona v'negeva v'kedema v'yama. Okay, there's some neat stuff in this verse. So the Lord says to Avram, after he had separated, after the separation of Lot, Me'imo, from being with him, the Lord says to him, this is where the quotation marks should start, Sa, which is a imperative form of nasa, which means to lift up. So lift up, please, na, einecha, your eyes. And here again, we have this Hebraism of lifting up your eyes. He didn't just say, look to the north, south, east, and west, but he said, lift up your eyes, vera'eh, and say. Another example of this is the Bible often says that the Lord Jesus answered and said, or, people will open their mouth and say. So these are just, these are Hebrew phrases, and they're kind of cool, and you get used to them, and it's very biblical sounding. So the Lord said, lift up your eyes and see men from Hamakom, from the place, Asher, which, Ata, you, Sham, you are there. So he says, look up, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, and look at all the words that it takes to express that simple thing. And then we've got the direction of the compass directions. Tzafona is north. The Negeva is south. I think south, Negev, I think it has to do with kind of dryness and probably heat and kind of an arid climate. So that becomes the name for the direction south. Vakedema, Kedem means before, and Yama, which would be to the westward. Now, there are a couple of explanations for this. First of all, Zaphon, I guess it's just the word for north, so it means northward. That's the most straightforward one. Vanegeva means in the direction of the desert that's south, that's in the southern portion of Israel. So Negeva wouldn't mean anything to anybody who didn't live in Israel, but that's the way they usually say south. Vakedema is that which is like before or to the east. And then Yama. Yam is the, if you look in the information window down at the bottom, Yod Mem means the sea. And this would be a reference to the Mediterranean Sea, which is to the west of Israel. So in Hebrew, the word for west is the term sea, like the Great Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the one that they would stand out most prominently to them. Now, there's another way directions are done also, and that is to express directions in Israel. You face to the east, Kedema. You face to the east, and your right hand, Yamin, is to the south. So sometimes Yamin, and it has to have a noon on the end of it, Yamin is another word for the south. So Smola, to the left, if you're facing south, is north. So that's another word for the north is Smola. And then behind you, Achara, it would be Achari, behind me would be the west. So sometimes the Mediterranean Sea is called the Acharot Yamim, like the sea that's behind you, if you're figuring out compass points by looking to the east. Isn't Hebrew interesting? Okay, so this is significant theologically, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes. The Lord says to Abraham, from where you're standing right now, I want you to lift up your eyes and look to the north, east, south, and west. And here's why he wants him to look in those directions. Verse 15, for all the land which you see, I will give to you and your descendants forever. God is using the things that Abraham is able to see to define the promised land. And like I say, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So here's verse 15. Ki et kol haaretz asher ata roe lecha et nena u lazaracha ad olam. Because all the land which you see, to you, lecha, et nena. If you look down in the information window, it's the verb natan, nun, tav, and the final form of nun. So you got nun, tav, nun, and it means to give. You got the aleph prefix. God is saying, I will give to you, or I will be giving to you, and u lazaracha. Zara is seed. It's the word for seed. It can be seed that you plant, or it's also the word for your offspring, your children. And he's going to give it to them ad olam. This is one of the Hebrew expressions for eternity, for ages to come, unto the ages to come. I'm going to give the land everywhere you see. So every place that God has called Abraham to look, God is going to give him that land, whatever land he sees. Now it's going to be further defined. In verse 16, the Lord says, and I will make your descendants as the descendants is going to be seed. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants could be numbered. Samti means to set, really. I will give et zaracha ka'afar haaretz asher im yuchal ish limnot et afar haaretz gam zaracha yimne. Okay. So God is saying here, I'm going to set, or I'm going to make, I'm going to establish would be a good word to use. Et zeracha, zara is seed. Here he's talking about the descendants of Abraham. Ka, like afar. Afar means the dust, or the like grains of sand on haaretz. Asher, which, im yuchal, if an ish was able, uchal, limnot, mana, mem, nun, hey, means to count or number. It can also mean to a point, so it has to do with calculations and stuff like that. Here it means counting. If a man was able to count et afar, the sand, haaretz of the earth, gam, then also zaracha yimne, he could count. So God is going to multiply Abraham's descendants. The interesting thing is, at this point, Abraham and Sarah haven't been able to have any kids, but God keeps talking about their descendants. And that's one of the great characteristics of Abraham, is he believed God. Even when year after year passed by and he and Sarah didn't have any kids, he was still counting on God giving him offspring, giving him descendants. So God goes on to say in verse 17, arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. So everything Abraham sees, he will one day possess, he and his descendants. And every place he walks, God is going to give to his descendants. Let's go with the Hebrew over here, verse 17. Kum hithalech ba'aretz la'araka ula rachava ki lecha et nena. Kum means stand up or rise. Sometimes it means like to rise from the dead, but here it just means like get up from where you're standing and walk. Hithalech, cause yourself to walk. Ba'aretz, in the land. La aracha means the length, arach. And sometimes it's a noun, sometimes it can be used verbally, like to extend something. Aracha can mean to extend something. U la rachav is the width. Rachav is width. Ki, because, lecha, to you, et nana. Here again, we have Natan. God is saying, I will give it to you. So every place you see, I'll give it to you. And every place you walk, every place your foot falls, I will give it to you. Then Avram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre. Terebinth tree, I'm not sure what that is. Oak is shows up in the information window. I don't know my trees. I don't know one tree from another. So I'm not sure what a terebinth tree is. Some people know. I'm going to assume it's an oak, the terebinth trees of Mamre, which is a location, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there. Avram built an altar there to Adonai. So verse 18, Va Echal Avram. Achal is the word for a tent. Echal Avram vayavo vayeshev ba'elone. And that's the word. Elon is the Hebrew word for a oak or a terebinth tree. I believe this is related to the word ayil, which means strong. It's got the same consonants. Ale here, elone, may mean like a strong tree, a hardwood tree. Mamre is a place name. Asher b'Hebron, which is in Hebron. V'yaven sham mizbeach la Yahweh. So Ye'echal, it's used as a verb here. So remember, we said when achal is used as a noun, it's the label for a tent. Here it means either to pitch a tent or to take your tent down and to move. So in this case, it would mean to take his tent down. Abraham took his tent down, vayavo, and he went, vayeshev, and he dwelt or he lived, ba'elone, by the oak trees, the strong trees, the terebinth trees, Mamre, of Mamre, Asher, which is B'Hebron. Hebron is still a thriving city in Israel. It's in Palestinian territory, so it's sometimes kind of a dangerous place for Jewish people to go. Which is, and that's tragic because the tomb of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so forth, is in Hebron. So it's a place Jewish people would like to go if they feel safe enough to do it. But yeah, then, and he built Sham there. Mizbeach is a word for an altar, and he did that to Yahweh, to Adonai. So that's the end of the chapter. But before we conclude, let me go back to the PowerPoint here and talk about let me go to both of my maps. With what the Lord has just said in chapter 13 here, that every place Abraham sees and every place his foot falls, God is going to give that land to him and his descendants. So where would we start? Abraham obviously saw the land of Ur of the Chaldeans here in Babylon. This is modern day Iraq right here. Over here would be Iran and then Afghanistan further to the east. So this is modern day Iraq. This is the Persian Gulf down here, and the Euphrates River, of course, flowing into the Persian Gulf. So Abraham started in Ur, and he walked. His feet touched the ground all along the journey up to Haran. He lived there for a while, then down into the promised land. But remember, once he and Sarah got to Bethel or Beersheba or wherever they were down there, they went to Egypt. So Abraham's eyes have seen all of this land, including right up to the river of Egypt. Now, later in the Bible, God is going to define the promised land as being from the river of Egypt on the west to the river, the great river Euphrates on the east. I should have looked up that Bible passage for you, but believe me, it's in the Bible. So Abraham has seen this much territory right here. So wouldn't you think the promised land would be from the river of Egypt here to the great river Euphrates over there by Ur of the Chaldeans? That is a huge parcel of land. It is about 1,500 miles from the Nile River to the Euphrates as it enters the Persian Gulf, about 1,500 miles. The Jewish people have never possessed anywhere near that amount of land. They have, what they possess now is basically from right here down to Eilat, Etzion Geber, and then some territory east of the Jordan River up to the north to the Golan Heights. So this area right here is basically all they have ever possessed. But God has promised them the promised land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, a huge parcel of territory. Now, is anyone aware of that? The answer is yes. Oh, before we get to this chart, let me say that a lot of scholars think that this little creek here, this little kind of dry riverbed called the Wadi El Arish, they think that's the river of Egypt. And so on some of these charts, you're going to see Wadi El Arish as the western boundary of Israel, kind of like this would be the western boundary. It says the river of Egypt, which I take to be the Nile, and Abraham saw the Nile, and his feet were, there by the Nile. Okay, look at some charts. This chart is from the Dake reference of study Bible, or whatever it's called, by Finest Dake, and he has a pretty well-known Bible chart with all the dispensations and stuff like this. And this is Dake's picture of the millennium, when, according to Ezekiel 47:13 through 23, the boundaries of the promised land, or Israel, the nation of Israel, in the millennial kingdom. And then in Ezekiel 48:1 through 29, the boundaries of each of the tribes of Israel are defined, explained, and really given in great detail. So here we have the promised land. Here's the Dead Sea. Here's the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River flowing through the middle. Down here we have here's the Negev down here south. We've got the Sinai Peninsula here, running over to what looks like it would be kind of halfway in between the Wadi El Arish and the Nile River. So Dake may have the promised land extending over to the Nile River. This may be the Nile River. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. And then all of the tribes of Israel have their territories spelled out in kind of very long parallel parcels like this. Here's the city of Jerusalem and the temple in the middle, and then further tribes down here to the south. And their territories extend all the way to the Euphrates River. This is the Euphrates, the Tigris. So Dake depicts the entire promised land. This is not a well-dimensioned map, but it's pretty well defined as being from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. And this is the entire promised land, about 1,500 miles this away. Rahav in width. I guess this would be Olech. That would be length. So that's a Dake's version of it. This is a picture from a book of Bible charts, once again, by Tim LaHaye, the author of the Left Behind series. And also, I think Thomas Ice assisted him in the preparing of these diagrams. So where do they have the promised land? Well, it runs all the way over to the Euphrates River. That part's right, all the way down here to Ur. And then like, here's all the tribal areas and so forth. Here's Jerusalem and the temple kind of in the middle. But here's the western boundary. And it looks like to me, this is the Wadi El Arish and not the Nile River. But he has an arrow pointed to the river of Egypt over in this direction. It looks like the arrow is pointing further to the west. So I'm not sure if Tim LaHaye has put the western boundary in the wrong place. Here's Gaza. So this looks like the Wadi, but he has the arrow here. So he may be intending that the promised land extends all the way over to the Nile River. So keep that in mind when the study of prophecy comes up in the end times and the millennial kingdom. And, you know, when people talk about the Jewish people usurping the land of others, look what the promised land is going to encompass. All of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. What would this be? Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Sinai Peninsula used to belong to Egypt. It was claimed by the Jews in the Six-Day War in 1967. So yeah, that's the extent of the promised land. And these a couple of verses that talk about the land that Abraham has seen and the land that his feet have traveled on, being the promised land, it kind of confirms this. So it's kind of important verses to keep in mind. With that, I think we'll bring this video to a close. Let me give you the blessing from the Old Testament from Numbers 6. I do believe, you know, we talked about using Yahweh or using the Lord, Adonai, or Hashem, or something like that. I believe the context of Numbers 6, I think this might be verse 24 or 26 or something like that, where God tells the priests that this is how they're to bless the people, by placing his name on them. So if there is an appropriate place to use God's name, I think it's when giving this blessing. So let me give it to you first in Hebrew, and then I'll give it to you in English. Yivarechecha Yahweh, vayishmarecha, Ya'er Yahweh panav elecha, v'yurenecha, Isa Yahweh panav elecha, v'yasem lecha shalom. So in English, that would be, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Shalom, dear friends. Hope we see you next time.